There's no time like the present, right? Might as well get started. You know, a lot of times after Pitt football games, after the Panthers, home or away, I do the Drive Home podcast. Get in the car after the game, drive home, turn on the old recorder on the phone, and talk for a half hour. Share some thoughts about the game. Call it the Drive Home podcast. A lot of people like it. A lot of people like the reaction podcast, shortly after the game, a couple hours after the game. Well, today was a little bit unique. It's Saturday night. I didn't go to the game today. I had some family obligations, so Jim Hammett covered the game for us, and he did a great job. He's got a lot of great content on Panther-Lair.com from the game. You should go check that out. But I said, what am I going to do about the Drive Home podcast? I'm not driving home. How am I going to do a podcast? How am I going to do a Drive Home podcast when I'm not driving home? Well, I said, if the situation merits it, and even if it does, we'll find something to talk about. Maybe we'll do an at-home podcast. Later in the evening, we'll fire up the live stream. Or maybe just tape something into the phone, whatever. Just throw it up there. Give people something to listen to. And then this game happened. And Pitt, NC State, at Heinz Field, it goes down 30-29. And it's a game that now I'm adding to a list. I'm going to show you my list. And we'll release this podcast, of course, as an audio podcast. As I get my dry erase board out here, though, I feel like a little visual aid is necessary. Okay? There's one. UNC 2018. Not done. 2. Stanford, 2018. Miami, 2019. Boston College, 2019. NC State, 2020. 5 losses in the last 2.5 seasons that could be defined in no way other than a bad loss. That could be defined solely and exclusively as losing a game you were supposed to win. And I'm not talking about betting favorites. I'm not talking about losing as the favorite. There have been other games like that. But you know what? You want to go to a game in 2017 where Pitt was favored against North Carolina and they lost. You want to tell me that was a bad loss? Sure, maybe. I don't know. That 2017 team was kind of a mess. All right? You go to 2015, 2016, you're not going to find a game like that. Not a game that belongs on this list. And I talked about this in the offseason. I talked about this throughout the offseason. Okay, and this is not the first. If you've listened to this podcast before, if you've read the website at Panther-Lair.com before, this is not the first time you've heard me say these things and mention these games. Okay? You've heard me talk that the most concerning thing right now with this program and this coach is that all of these games have happened recently. These are late era developments for Pat Narduzzi and the Pitt football program. Carolina in 18, Stanford in 2018, Miami and Boston College last year, and now NC State gets added to the list. And NC State they're not a bad team. They're not like Carolina was in 2018. They're not playing with half a squad like Stanford was in 2018. And they're probably better than Boston College was last year, and maybe Miami as well. They're a decent team, but still a team Pitt should have beaten. And this was a game that Pitt should have won. And instead of adding a notch to the win column for this year and a 4-0 start for the first time since 1991, we're putting another name on this dry erase board. And there's only so much room on this dry erase board. And you can chalk that up to penmanship or maybe fate and sort of a happy coincidence. There's only room for a couple more of these here. And you get a couple more of these, dry erase board's full. You know what happens when the dry erase board gets full? These kinds of games are what lead to the end of a coaching regime. And you're not going to hear me on this podcast saying Pat Narduzzi should be fired. You're not going to hear me saying that Pat Narduzzi's hit his ceiling. You're not going to hear me saying most of the things that you've seen on Twitter or the message boards in the aftermath of this game. Just like you saw on Twitter or the message boards in the aftermath of the Boston College game, or the aftermath of the Miami game, or the aftermath of the Stanford game, or the aftermath of the North Carolina game. I'm not going to go down that path, but kind of like I did in 2018. When we got to the end of that 2018 season, before the Sun Bowl, I said, look, I'm not saying whether Sean Watson should or should not be fired, but I'm saying if you look at the empirical evidence of what he accomplished, of what his offense did at Pitt, it's the kind of performance that gets a guy fired, that gets a coordinator fired. And he got fired. If you keep adding names to this list, if you keep losing games you're supposed to win, that's when the end comes. That's when you reach the final point. And, people talk about ceilings and how much can Pitt really accomplish with Pat Narduzzi. And to me, it's less about that win total and more about avoiding these games. Because when you lose these games, it's not just a loss. It's a bad loss. And a bad loss does a whole lot of damage. Particularly once you start digging into why the bad loss happened. And that, for me, and there's a lot of things to talk about with this loss to NC State. I mean, there are a lot of things. There's even some positive things to talk about. And we will get into that. We will talk about some positives. Because I really want to talk about Kenny Pickett. All right? Because earlier, 5 days ago, on this podcast, I talked about Kenny Pickett at length. And I talked about the things he specifically, as an individual, needed to do better. And he did them better today. He did them better against NC State and had one of his best games as Pitt's starting quarterback. Maybe it's not one of, maybe it was his best game. 22 of 39 for 411 and a touchdown. Should have had more than one touchdown, really. Then he ran for a couple of scores. I want to talk about Kenny Pickett. And I want to talk about the strength of his play and how well he played. He was, to some extent, maybe the only bright spot in this game. I guess DJ Turner, you would make a good case for him. 8 catches for $186. That's not bad. But the fact is, there are some very real issues that happened in this game. Some things that happened that that don't just cost you a game, but when they continue to pile up and cost you more and more of these games and add more and more names to this list of games you should not lose, losing to teams that you're supposed to beat, when those issues keep cropping up, then I think the powers that be start asking, okay, what can really be accomplished here? Because in 2010, and it's not a perfect comparison, 2010 is not a perfect comparison for right now because Dave Wannstedt had off-the-field issues in addition to the problems that were happening on the field. But in 2010, you saw that team lose games for the same reasons over and over. This team right now has some problems. On the first drive, on NC State's first drive, in their first 5 drives, Pitt had, or first 4 drives, I'll get this right. My notes are scribbled down in front of me. 5 offside penalties. 2 on the first drive. 1 on the second, 1 on the third, 1 on the fourth. Every single one put Pitt in a bad position. First offside penalty turned 2nd and 6 into 2nd and 1, and they convert it and end up scoring a touchdown on that drive. Second one, also on that drive, they had a 2nd and 5 that turned into a first down with an offside penalty. Second drive, a 2nd and 7 turned into a 2nd and 2. They converted that and ended up kicking a field goal. Third drive, a 3rd and 6 turns into a 3rd and 1. They get a touchdown out of it. And the fourth drive, a 3rd and 3 becomes an automatic first down. And they punted on that drive. That's 17 points on drives with offside penalties. Every single scoring drive NC State had in this game, there was a Pitt defensive penalty. 11 defensive penalties. And that brings up the big D, the D word. And I'm not talking about defense. I'm talking about discipline. Discipline. It's a major issue for this team. And when we talk about trends from last year, problems that this team had a year ago that are carrying over to this year, when I talk about these games that got away, losing to teams you're supposed to beat, particularly those the two last year and then the NC State game, discipline. Pitt was one of the most penalized teams in the country last year. And we spent all our time talking about procedure penalties on offense and the lack of focus, and which ultimately is a lack of discipline if you're not going to pay enough attention to the snap count to move at the right time or to line up the right way. That's a discipline problem. But those issues were on defense as well. I spent a lot of time this offseason talking about the offensive penalties, but it's an issue on defense too. The targeting calls, as much as you want to argue about when a guy is or isn't tossed for targeting, and I'm right there with you. I think there's inconsistency in the way the rule is applied. But at a certain point, as players and coaches, you know what's going to get called. You know when the flags are going to be thrown. And if you don't have the discipline to figure that out and avoid putting yourself in those situations, stop giving them a chance to throw that flag on you. It's the same thing with the pass interference penalties. And you're going to take them every now and then. It's going to happen every now and then. You're playing football. And they play an aggressive style of cornerback and coverage in this defense. And I understand that. They took 3 pass interference penalties in this game. 5 offsides penalties. You grab a face mask. You have defensive holding on the game securing. Now, I mean, the defensive holding call, it was ticky-tack. But also, you're trying to make sure guys aren't getting into the end zone. So, okay, I guess a little bit. You get a roughing the pass. I mean, the offsides kill me, though. Where's your discipline? Watch the ball. Don't move until the ball moves. And I'll have to go back and look at Pat Narduzzi's postgame to see how much he talked about that, to say, NC State was doing something weird that threw their defensive guys off. I don't know what it is, but I'm pretty sure the ball can't move. And if the ball does move and it's not actually snapped, that's a false start. And if you just wait until the ball moves, then you'll be fine. And I know you want to get a jump. You want to time it up right. It's going to give you the best chance to get to the quarterback and all that stuff. Well, guess what? Every one of those times you gave them 5 yards. That's 25 yards. NC State didn't have to do anything at all for them. Pitt just handed it to them. Over and over again. And it's a lack of discipline. And at a certain point, that lack of discipline, whether it's in the procedure penalties last year, whether it's in excessive celebration penalties, whether it's in targeting calls, whether it's in offsides penalties, of all damn things, at some point, and I believe we might have already passed this point, it begins to reflect on your head coach. It becomes a matter of the team following his lead. And I've always wondered about this. I've always wondered if Pat Narduzzi's sideline histrionics, what impact they have on his team. Now, I think he's calmed down. I think he's mellowed over the years. I don't think he's quite as, as I said, I don't think he's quite as animated on the sideline. It was really bad those first couple years. And I think Pitt, as a team, paid the price for it. Narduzzi certainly did. He was fined, although that was his first post-game comments after the Virginia Tech game in 2016. But I think Pitt, as a team, has paid the price for it. Because eventually, these officials are human. And eventually, if you're in their ear constantly, you're riding them constantly, you're not going to get calls. And you're not going to get the benefit of the doubt. And you better believe, whatever you're getting called for one week, in that next game, that next head coach you're facing is up in the officials' ears before the game. Watch out. These guys, you know what they do. They like to do this. Keep an eye on that. You think Pitt draws more penalties in the past couple of years or commits more penalties in the past couple of years? There's probably something to that. And I don't think they're totally without fault. But I've always wondered how Narduzzi's sideline conduct and his personality, how it's impacted the team. And I think to some extent it could fire those guys up. You know what I mean? To some extent it could be that extra boost of energy they need. But this team has a problem with control, has a problem with discipline. And to Narduzzi's credit, I'm not talking about off-the-field discipline. You don't hear about these guys getting in trouble. And if it happens, they must do a really good job sweeping it under the rug. But I mean, you don't see these things coming out. But on the field, these execution issues, these focus issues, I don't know. There's a problem there. There's a real problem with discipline. And if you have a problem with discipline, that's, like I say, I mean, that's the kind of thing that leads to a downfall. You know, this game, two sides of the ball, defense and offense. Offense finishes with 503 yards, 29 points, season high against Power 5 competition. But it still wasn't enough, and it still wasn't good enough. Going into the red zone 5 times and scoring 2 touchdowns, that's not a recipe for winning, and it continues to be an issue for this offense. And I said before the game that you're going to have games where the defense is going to give up some points, and they're going to give up some yards. Now, I did not expect the defense to be rendered as ineffective as they were in this game against NC State. NC State picked them apart, particularly on that game-winning touchdown drive. I mean, it reminded me of 2016. You know, I mean, and again, you give credit to the Wolfpack. Devin Leary played really well. This is, you know, they have some very good players. They have some very good skill players. Pat Bostic pointed out to me before the game. I mean, they have size. They had size in the perimeter and obviously a very big tight end. But this defense just didn't get anything. You know, I mean, they 2 sacks in the game after averaging, more than 5 per game in the first 3 games? Almost 6 per game in the first 3 games. They got no pressure. They did a good job against the run, but they were getting beat with that early on, and I think that changed their approach, and then NC State was able to pick them apart in a way that we haven't really seen this defense get picked apart outside of maybe the Eastern Michigan game. You know, we haven't seen it happen for the better part of the last couple of years, really. I mean, Clemson obviously had a good game against them, but I mean, you know, you might have to go back to, they gave up a lot of points to Duke in 2018 and UCF that year. But I mean, really, you're counting on one hand back over the past 2.5 seasons that a team has picked Pitt's defense apart the way NC State did at various points in this game, particularly on the game-winning touchdown drive. And I don't know if anything was particularly necessarily exposed. I don't think any vulnerabilities were shown. I don't think the blueprint was laid for future teams to do the same thing. I think you have to have a certain level of player, and I don't think Pitt's going to play this poorly on defense again. But they were not good. You know, and whether that's a matter of reading your press clippings or thinking you're better than you are, or dealing with injuries, and they had some guys in there, some subs playing more than you would like them to be. You know, and maybe it was just a combination of circumstances. I expect this defense to be better. I do not think this defense was overrated and overhyped when we talked about it in the week leading up to this game. I think that Louisville had a very good offense, and this defense shut them down. I don't think you take away that game because of what happened in this game, but you also can't ignore what happened in this game. And maybe this is a wake-up call for that defense. You have to be a lot better. Now, the other side of the ball, far more concerning. They cannot run the ball. There is no running game to speak of. 92 rushing yards, and Kenny Pickett had 40. It's completely ineffective. And this was a rush defense that should have been susceptible to even the weakest of rushing offenses. And Pitt couldn't do anything. And that's an indictment on the running backs, but it's also an indictment on the line. I mean, when you watch Vincent Davis and Izzy Abanikanda and Daniel Carter for what did he have? One snap, one carry. There was no running room for those guys. There were no holes. Occasionally there was a cutback lane, but even the longer runs, you know, Davis's longest run was 15 yards. Todd Sibley had an 8-yard run out of the Wildcat. Abanacanda's longest run was 2 yards. You have 4 carries for a net 2 yards. When those guys even got a little bit of room, they had to fight like crazy. Again, against a not very good NC State defense. The running game is just not an option for this offense right now. And I don't know if it's going to be all season. I don't know how it's going to get better because you're not going to find many rush defenses that are seemingly more susceptible to this than this one was. Now, thankfully for Pitt, Kenny Pickett played the game of his life. Kenny Pickett was really good against NC State. I mean, maybe the best game he's played at Pitt. And I think there are a few contenders for that. I mean, I think he was really good against Penn State last year. Obviously the North Carolina game that they won in overtime last year was one of his best games. This game is right up there. And what I talked about on Tuesday was that, look, he's got to be more comfortable in the pocket, have better pocket presence, have better composure, feel the pressure, and and see it and not panic and not start shuffling out of the pocket. And I thought he did a great job of that. I think he stood tall in the pocket. And there was a lot of time NC State was only rushing 3, but he found holes in the zone, and he made some great throws. And he was stung by some drops. Taysier Mack had at least 3 brutal drops. Fortunately for him, DJ Turner played an amazing game with 8 for 186. Like I said, I mean, Mack still ended up with 6 for 76. It hurt to lose Jordan Addison early in the game because he had that big play on the second snap of the game, and then they lost him when he had that shoulder. His shoulder got banged up. I think that was in the red zone, right? But Pickett was really, really good, and they needed him to be really, really good because they could not run the ball at all. And that goal line situation, I mean, the quarterback sneak is the best option, just going down, not trying to go over. Go through. Go through the line. Don't try to jump over the line because that, I don't know how they ended up ruling that as a touchdown, but Pitt will take it. The field goal they kicked down there near the goal line, I actually don't have a problem with that. I've gone back and forth in different situations. I think some of the comparisons you would draw is they kicked a field goal late against Miami last year. Or they, chose to kick the field goal against Penn State last year as opposed to going for the touchdown, against Miami. I mean, Penn State, I could go back and forth on. You could convince me either way. Miami, they kicked a field goal to take a lead. If you have a chance to take the lead late in the fourth quarter, you kick the field goal and you take the lead as opposed to rolling the dice on scoring a touchdown to also take the lead. Take the more high percentage play. This one, they're real close to the goal line. They're on the 2 or something like that. Your defense is playing really well right now. I like going for the touchdown to extend it, to give yourself a bigger lead potentially if you make it. And if you don't, which is ultimately what happened, you pin their offense really deep when your defense is starting to get some momentum. Now, NC State was able to drive out of the shadow of the end zone, and ideally your defense would stop them, and you'd get great field position, and with another great shot to get points. NC State was able to drive away from the end zone, and you saw what fell out from there. I didn't hate that decision though, of going for it in that position. Now, I mean, you end up losing a game by 1 point. Getting a field goal looks pretty important now, because you'd be up 32-30 instead of down 30-29. But I didn't hate that decision when it was made. I thought that was an okay call to make. And decisions like that, we're always going to question them in hindsight. All right, I want to check some of the questions here. Josh Newark says, defense played with little urgency, tons of mental mistakes pre-snap, multiple drops, run game tricks no one on defense, backs get 2 to 3 yards at best. This was a horrendous loss. Yeah, it was a bad loss. I don't think there's any question about it. The defense and urgency, yeah, I don't know what it was. You know what I mean? I don't know if NC State just had a good scheme. I don't know if they just had good blocking protection, but I mean, you just didn't get much out of anybody on that defensive line. I mean, I'm looking down the stats right now. I got to pull it up on the computer. I mean, Patrick Jones has 2 tackle assists, half a tackle for loss. Rashad Weaver ends up with 3 tackles, 4 quarterback hurries, no sacks. Jones doesn't get credit with any quarterback hurries. I mean, you just weren't getting much out of these guys at all. John Morgan, no tackles, 1 quarterback hurry. There was just no press. There was no pressure. There was no push. It just, after seeing it so much in the first 3 games, it was almost shocking to see the defense just disappear in a game like this. It really was. David Allen says, the game confirms that Pat Narduzzi will never be an elite coach. He is at best 8-5. David, I don't think there's ever going to be one game that confirms something like that, one way or the other, for a coach. It's never going to be one game. Like, the 13-9 game did not confirm that Dave Wanstead was a great coach, and the loss at Connecticut or the blowout loss to West Virginia or whichever game you want to pick in 2010 or even the Cincinnati game in 2009 didn't confirm that he was never going to be a great coach. It's how things pile up. So you have, and I go back to Wanstead because he was the last coach that Pitt fired who had actually coached games. So, I mean, not counting Michael Haywood. But, I mean, you've got the 2009 game, right? The Cincinnati game, okay. And then you go into 2010 and you lose at Utah and you get blown out by Miami. And you have that just disgusting loss at Connecticut. And you get blown out by West Virginia. And they add the off-field issues and it piles up and you say, this just isn't working. This guy's never going to get it done. And it's cumulative. It's things adding up. It's never just one game. It's the way that things add up. And if you're listening on the podcast, I brought my dry erase board out again. Because as I talk about things adding up, we've now got 5 games in the last 2.25 seasons that are certifiably bad losses. Things add up. And that's what gets coaches in trouble, is when it adds up. And it starts to feel like this is never going to work. It's never just one game. It's all of them together. Brock Madonic says, when will Heather Legg realize a 7 to 8 win season isn't enough for a program that has so much history and success yet can never get over the hump? When will Narduzzi and Whipple be let go? It's rough. I don't know what Heather Legg... I'll say this. I feel like athletic directors are not as, sort of exclusive. Most athletic directors are not driven as exclusively by wins and losses as fans, I think. And that's not to say that they don't matter, but I think athletic directors tend to look at the entire picture more than fans do. Athletic directors tend to look at the whole thing: wins, losses, success relative to peers, in addition to graduation rates and whether guys are, finishing school and staying out of trouble and, representing not just the football program, but the athletic department of the university well. I think athletic directors look at all of that. And then you've got to balance out the wins and losses versus all of the other things. Now, I think for fans, wins and losses are number one, and there's not even anything close, and nothing outweighs that. I don't think that's always the case for an athletic director. I think athletic directors tend to balance things a little bit more. Now, at a certain point, struggles on the field, just outweigh maybe the good things that someone is doing. I don't know if Pat Narduzzi's there yet. I don't think Pat Narduzzi's there yet. A few more games on the old dry erase board, then yeah, we might start talking about Pat Narduzzi being there, but I don't think he's there yet. Let's see. Josh Newark says, I'm so underwhelmed with Mark Whipple's run calls, 3rd and short toss sweeps and runs outside the tackles. I agree. There were runs that I don't understand why you need a yard or you need 2 yards and you're running sideways. Go straight. You only need a yard or 2. Go straight. I don't understand those calls. But at the same time, how could you trust this run blocking right now? How could you trust this run game, the backs or the linemen? Can you trust these guys? Can you trust these guys to get a yard? Because they failed multiple times. Jimmy Morrissey, I saw after the game, he called it embarrassing when they get stuffed at the goal line. And he's right. Because when it comes down to it, they always say that, football is a game, it's about blocking and tackling. At its most basic level, football is about blocking and tackling. And there's nothing more sort of essentially football than down and one. You need 1 yard. It's about imposing your will and who wants it more and all those other kinds of cliches like that. There could be strength advantages, there could be talent advantages, but on that one snap, when the ball is snapped, who is going to push harder? And this Pitt offensive line, and no disrespect to them, because I think they're fine young men, they're nice guys. I like Jimmy Morrissey a lot, and the other guys that we've talked to, I think they're good guys, but they're not getting the push. They're losing that battle of wills more often than they are winning it. So I don't even know, if you're Mark Whipple, I don't know what you do on 3rd and short. I guess you do the quarterback sneak and hope that you can just keep doing it over and over and over again, because I don't know what other option you have. Your offensive line can't run block right now. They're not run blocking right now. Maybe they'll start run blocking at some point in the future. That would be ideal, but they're not doing it right now. And as long as they're not going to do it, you can't call those runs in those situations. That's probably why he calls the horizontal runs, the sweep plays and stuff like that on a 3rd and short, because he's hoping that the defense will crash into the middle and there'll be an opportunity, like a cutback lane to put your foot in the ground and go forward. Because he sure as hell isn't finding it up the middle of the field. I don't know what they do. I don't know what they do. Royce Beacom says, what about games with 1st and goal at the 1? Were they all losses? Talks about Virginia Tech, NC State, Penn State. Yeah, I mean, they've had a few notable stands in the last few years where they've had the ball right at the goal line and failed to get it done, and they've ended up losing the games. I'm sure they've had a 1st and goal inside the 5 in games that they've won, but those don't tend to stick out as much as, Virginia Tech in 2017. It's the end of the game. It's the final stand of the game. It's the final drive of the game, and they're trying to score a touchdown. They have the ball at the 1, and they can't get in. Penn State, similar situation, late in the game. I think those stand out a little bit more. Ricky the Dragon Kayak says, we're going backwards under Narduzzi. Instead of winning games we should lose, we're losing games we should win. I don't know. See, that's my concern, right? I mean, because there's something to be said for stagnancy. There's something to be said for, not really moving forward. And I think at various points it's looked like Pat Narduzzi is moving the program forward. But when you have these games coming up, these dry erase board games, and they're coming up, they're like year 4, year 5, year 6 developments. Not year 1 and year 2 and year 3, but year 4, year 5, and year 6, these are starting to happen. It does feel like you wonder about which direction you're heading in. I can't argue about that, of having real questions. Let me see. Josh Newark, best season with Pat Narduzzi is 8-5. He has at least 5 losses every year at Pitt, correct? Yep, you're right. That's 8-5 is where he has topped out so far. Is that the ceiling? I don't know. But if you keep losing games like this, it is the ceiling. Let's roll on here. Will Z, can someone answer why this coaching staff loves Vincent Davis? And I think I think Vincent Davis is beginning a rough rap from Pitt fans. I mean, he is a smaller back. He's not breaking a lot of tackles. He's probably not going to break a lot of tackles. But he's probably still, at this moment in time, their best option, like their best overall tailback. I think Israel Abanikanda can get there eventually. I think if Daniel Carter could be healthy, he could be that guy. Todd Sibley, for what he does in the Wildcat, is not going to get those opportunities in the regular offense. It's just not going to happen. They don't believe he can play in it. They don't trust him in it for whatever reason. And they see these guys every day in practice. They know who they are and they know what they can do. And they're not going to put him in the regular offense. So he'll get some wildcat snaps every game, and that's it. And he'll line up in the victory formation if they have the ball at the end of a game when they're winning. It's going to be Vincent Davis, A.J. Davis, Israel Abanikanda, and Daniel Carter, if Carter gets healthy. And I think as Abanikanda grows and develops, if he can mature and learn more about the offense and be more, and the coaches can trust him more, I think he'll get more and more snaps. But he's not at that point right now. And Daniel Carter's hurt, and A.J. Davis is hurt. You don't have any other options right now. It's Vincent Davis. Let's see. Rolling down, people were talking about the running backs, and I mean that's a question mark we've had all season. I mean, we've wondered about the running backs. RJ Seaman 38 says our kids overcame penalties and bad calls, but could not overcome poor coaching. Only reason Pitt loses was because of Narduzzi. No, they lost. They lost because their defense played lousy for the bulk of this game, and their defense, in addition to blowing coverages and letting guys run free, which some of that is certainly on the coaches whose scheme was taken advantage of, but these players also lacked discipline on the field, whether it was the offsides, whether it was pass interference, or roughing the passer, or face mask, whatever it was, particularly the offsides. That's why they lost, is because of that lack of discipline and lack of focus. Now, when it keeps happening over and over and over again, then it becomes a reflection on the coach. Then it becomes about the coach and whether and what he and his staff are doing to instill the right amount of discipline. Because at some point, you have to be able to coach that out of your players. And if you can't, then, you failed, because that's your responsibility. That's your job, is to coach them. Let's see. TRR says, how can Whipple not call a quarterback sneak from the half-yard line? How does Pitt not run the play clock down more on the 3 plays when Kenny scored? NC State had no timeouts left. I think we saw the quarterback sneaks more later in the game after they had some struggles on short yardage in the early going. But, so I think there might have been some change there. So that's a good thing. I thought also seeing Kenny Pickett run some design runs was a good thing. They did have a situation where they were in a crucial spot, I think close to the goal line. They tried to run a read option play. And I don't hate quarterback runs. I think quarterback runs are something this offense could use with to a certain level of effectiveness. I mean, I know they don't want to get Kenny Pickett hurt. They obviously want to keep him out on the field so he can throw, but he can make plays with his legs. I just don't think you call read option in a crucial situation when that's not your bread and butter. They don't run read plays every down or every series or anything like that. And I don't think I don't think that's the kind of thing you could just drop in there every now and then and run it effectively. I mean, that stuff takes practice. You have to be good at running a read option. And to get good at it, you have to practice it a lot and use it all the time. So I don't know if that was a great time to roll it out. Let's see, just kind of rolling through some comments and questions people had here during the live stream. I appreciate everybody joining us here on a Saturday night. I know it's after 9 o'clock. Hopefully you have some beer. I've got the Arcs Blonde Ale going tonight. There's a lot of questions, a lot of criticisms of the defense, and that's right. I mean, look, it really comes down to big takeaways from the game. I'll say this just because I feel like we covered a lot of stuff here as people were talking about, talking about different topics in the live chat. I mean, big takeaways from the game. Number one on the positive side, and maybe the only thing on the positive side, is Kenny Pickett was really good. Kenny Pickett deserves every bit of praise he's going to get from this game. I think he's even, for a guy who threw for 411 yards, and only one touchdown, I think he was even better than those numbers would indicate. And Josh Newark brings up having touched on Taysier Mack dropping the 2-point conversion. Yeah, I mean, Mack had at least 3 drops I can think of off the top of my head. Every one of them was bad, and that 2-point conversion was the worst of all. I mean, the ball's right there for you. You have to make that catch. I mean, we all ripped and trashed the tight ends last year for all the drops. Well, I mean, receivers did it too. And Taysier Mack, despite going 6 for 76 and having some huge catches in the game, he also had some pretty bad drops. But Kenny Pickett was really good. If this is the start of something for him, that's a huge step in the right direction. The running game took only steps in the wrong direction, whether they were to the left or to the right or mostly just backward. And that is, I just don't know how that gets corrected. I don't think that gets corrected. I think that is what it's going to be this year. And they might have 1 or 2 games where they have a little bit of an outburst and get 150, 160, 170 yards, maybe even have a 100-yard rusher. It's not going to be a consistent threat. It's going to be just Kenny Pickett. Kenny Pickett has to lead this offense. And he's going to need those receivers to do a much better job than Taysier Mack did in some of those situations. It's hard to say the receivers as a whole because DJ Turner was really good and made some huge catches and put up some big numbers. But they have to be better. The running, because you just can't rely on the running game. And so it's going to have to be on Kenny Pickett. And now this defense has to bounce back. They have to take this to heart. They should be royally pissed off all week long. All week long. Somebody tweeted or posted on the message board. I didn't see this, so I'm not going to, claim it, but said that a couple of the defensive players had to be separated, held apart from each other at the end of the game, because they were going at it. Good. You guys should be mad at yourselves and mad at each other, because for all your talk and all your chest thumping. And and rightfully so. I mean, I called Pitt's defense a championship level defense, and I really believe that it was because it was playing at that level through the first 3 games. Those guys deserved all the props they were getting, and they're going to deserve every bit of trash talk they're going to get this week. And they should take it to heart, and they should take it personally, and they should take it out on Boston College next week. TRR, Brock Madonic says BC won't be easy. TRR says, what do you make of the Boston College game? Bounce back. I mean, the opportunity's there. I don't think Boston College is a pushover, but I also don't think, they almost lost to who they play a week ago or 2 weeks ago, Texas Southern or Texas State, one of those. I mean, they were, they were struggling against that team. This will be another game that Pitt should win. BC has some good players. There's no question about it. But this is another game that Pitt should win, just like NC State was a game that Pitt should win. And we'll see next week if Boston College goes on the whiteboard. I'll have to give this whiteboard back to my kids. My son uses it in his 2nd grade school. So I'll have to give that back to him. We'll see if we do one of these podcasts next Saturday night if we have to bust the whiteboard back out, add another name to it. But look, we said it all along. Or I said it. I said it throughout the week because I did talk a lot about how good this defense has been playing, but I said it throughout the week too. I was like, look, because I focused on the offense so much this week. And I said there's going to be a game where this defense gives up points, where this defense, faces some adversity, creates some adversity for itself, was the case today. And the offense is going to have to pick up the slack. The offense didn't pick up the slack here, despite Kenny Pickett playing really, really well. Red zone offense has to get better. Goal line offense has to get better. Overall, total offense has to get better. Because you can't let one bad game by the defense sink your chances. And when the defense had a bad game here, it sank Pitt's chances. And now, Panthers are 3-1 overall, 2-1 in the ACC. And the road just got a lot tougher. It got a lot tougher to get to some of those goals that the program had, that the team had, that the players and the coaches had. It got a lot tougher because this was one of the games when we broke down the schedule into four games they should win, 2 games that they're going to have a hard time, they won't be favored to win, and then the 4 toss-up games. Well, they just lost one of the 4 games they should have won. They just lost one of those 4. So, make sure you go to Panther-Lair.com, though, because for all of this, I mean, we've still got plenty to talk about there. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. We're talking about the game there at Panther-Lair.com on the message boards right now. We got a lot of coverage from the game. We're going to have a lot throughout the week breaking down what happened in this game, how it can get better, so don't go anywhere, and make sure that you stay tuned, because there's definitely a lot of interesting and lively conversation. Of course, we'll have our regular weekly podcast Tuesday night at 8:30 right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. We'll release the podcast as well, so you can tune into that. That's always fun. You get in the chat here on YouTube, and we have a little conversation. We enjoy doing that. So be there for that, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Next Saturday morning, 8 a.m., we'll have the Panthers Insider Show on 93.7 The Fan. And throughout the week, really, the place to be is Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. It's the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news, right? That's the place you want to be to talk about Pitt sports. Panther-Lair.com. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in to the live stream here on Saturday night. Thanks to you for listening to the podcast. If you're listening to it on Sunday or Monday or whenever you got around to it, appreciate that. Saturday didn't go the way you hoped it would go. Hope the rest of the weekend's a little better for you. Hope you have a great rest of the weekend. Hope you have a great week, and we will talk to you again on Tuesday night. Thanks a lot, everybody. Have a good night.